everybody. This is Miss Heather and Miss Rachel, and it is time for Gardening with the Gals. Today we are going to be talking about garden cleanup, and then the next few weeks we will break it down, and we have a couple of special guests coming in, hopefully. We have contacted them. We're just waiting for their answers. So let's just get into it. I will let her lead our conversation as normal, and I will be the answerer.
All right, so today what we're going to start off with is harvesting. Now, for me, I have an apron, and what I do when I harvest is I just tie the apron around my waist, and then I basically hold one end of it, and I set things in. Some people use a basket, some people just gather it all up in their arms like very small kittens in mess, and then just take it inside. I like to have a little bit of a, almost like a fail-safe, just because I don't really want to drop anything and damage it or get anything like dirt, mulch, whatever, because I have cats that walk in my garden. I don't want any residue from what they leave behind. Miss Heather, what all do you harvest, and how do you prefer to harvest?
So what I use to harvest is I either use like a basket, or if I have like a bucket, or if I'm just in a hurry, taking time while my child's napping, I just grab a plastic grocery bag, and that's usually pretty good for the beans. I can just toss them in and not worry about them. And can you review the other question with me?
What all do you harvest?
What all do I harvest? So as in, what do I have in my garden?
Yeah, or what needs, I guess, how do you harvest certain plants? Like, do you cut them? Do you just pick it right off with your hand? What's in your garden?
I do the green beans, I do tomatoes, I do peppers, I do some herbs. So I think I have some rosemary, some parsley, and a couple other little small things that don't come on till fall, like my pumpkins. Like, I let those grow until I think they're perfect, and I rotate and I change them around so they're that perfect round shape that I want them to be. I just, for the most part, I just pick them by hand and try to just use a couple fingers. So this is your stem on, let's say, your tomato plant. You've got a stem that goes like this. I grab it, and then wherever the fruit is, I pick off, so I'm not having to pull from one side to the other and possibly break my stems, because tomato stems can be very thin and easily broken, and once you do that, that's very hard to get them to be fixed and or reproduce again. That's what I do. My beans are pretty forgiving. I just have them on a trellis or a bent cattle panel. I just kind of hold one in and then just grab what I need to. I'm not as careful as I would be with a tomato. So, and then my parsley, my rosemary, parsley and rosemary. Parsley, I can either trim it with my fingers because I have kind of longer fingernails, or most likely I have some snips. My garden snips is what I call them, my cutters. I use those, and then with the rosemary, it gets a bark type feel to the stems of it, and I do use something to cut those because I don't want to break it further and damage further. That's how I harvest.
All right. Something that I personally do is I get a stool because it's really hard on my knees. I think I mentioned in the last video, my knees are very bad. So I get a stool, and then depending on how my back feels that day, sometimes I even wear a back brace just to help my posture. Although I'm, bending over, it still kind of helps my back not, I guess, push out as much. So I get those things as well as my apron. I typically harvest with some scissors just because I have a lot of herbs like oregano, thyme, rosemary, and one other, lavender. I grew lavender for culinary purposes. I also just kind of like the smell of it. It can be used in a ton of stuff like essential oils, candles, and food. One thing that I've made before is honey and lavender bread. It was okay. My sister liked it a lot. It was just okay. But yeah, so I typically kind of get a whole kit and caboodle ready so that I'm most comfortable while I harvest. I have more herbs than I do really anything else. I do have, as I've mentioned before, blueberry plants. And for those, typically, I don't use my apron. I get a big like mixing bowl from my kitchen, and I just kind of hold it under the plant, and with one hand I just gently brush through the plant, because they drop when they're ready to, be picked, they drop off very easily. So I also need to kind of check the dirt underneath to see if there are any that have not rotted, that they're in good shape, that I can throw it in there as well. For those, I'm not as worried of picking them off the dirt because I have a cage around my blueberry plants, so I'm not worried about any critters leaving, stuff I don't want on my blueberries. For onions, I typically use a plastic bag because, as you all may know, like when you buy onions from the grocery store, their skin is very thin and flaky, and it will just kind of shed into your refrigerator. I hate that. So I put them in a plastic bag to kind of keep that mess contained, so that once I run out, I just take the bag out of my fridge, I throw it away, and then I don't have any mess left in my drawers that I need to clean the fridge for. So that's typically what I do. There are a lot of different ways, and different plants need different harvesting. As Heather mentioned, with the green beans, they're more forgiving than tomato plants. Corn, I think, is another one that's pretty resilient.
Self-explanatory, resilient.
Yeah,
but
you just snap it off.
You just snap it off the stalk. Pretty easy, but you gotta make sure it is ready to be eaten. If you do it too early, you're just going to have kind of like what's called the field corn. It's not going to be as soft or as good or as sweet, depending on what kind you get. And if you wait too long, most likely they have bugs or pests have got to them. Other critters, like I said, my mother-in-law has to fight off the raccoons every year, and it doesn't matter if they're ripe for harvest or even overly ripe at times. You really got to keep an eye on that stuff, because it's like the raccoons know the perfect time to get them. So if you let them go too long, then they're going to start to rot and get that moisture, and it's going to rot in there.
How do you tell if an ear of corn is ready to be picked?
Most of the time it'll have a tassel on it, and then it's just kind of like by sight and color is how I do it. I haven't really cultivated much corn. We didn't really have the property like my stepmom-in-law has. So,
all right. And some people I know pick their tomatoes early. My stepdad is one that likes green tomatoes. I don't know why. He just does. But how do you know that your tomatoes are ready to pick?
Well, like you said, it depends. Like some people like to pick them early so they can have that fried green tomato and fry them up. And I haven't tried it yet, but I've heard they're very good. I usually go by color and the shape and how they look is what I do. So I do like kind of bigger tomatoes. Or when I was little, we would do bigger tomatoes for the canning. So it's just, it was usually end of July, beginning of August, if not, depending on when you put them out. It could be even close to the 1st of September at times. You can get a good harvest because they will just continually bloom if you let them. And if I notice something's going on with them, or if they're just about to turn red, they're kind of like that orangey yellow, I will pick them off if I know they're getting too big for the vine or the plant, and I put them in a window, or a lot of people will put them on a porch railing or whatever in the sun to ripen them.
Alrighty.
That's how I do it.
In terms of other plants, honestly, with all gardening, it is reliant on the color, the size. You have to just tell by your eyesight and what you see.
And touch.
Yeah.
Like green beans, I do the touch test. So
I had a test where you would know a green bean is ready to pick if it was as long or longer than your ring finger.
Interesting.
That's what I was always told. I don't know if that's holds up, but I mean, it's worked for us. We've always had, decent sized beans, which gave us a lot more for canning and other things like that. So that was the rule that I was taught.
Interesting.
Sadly, I can't say it's a rule of thumb because it's not my thumb. Sorry, guys. Sorry.
I love it.
Thank you.
I learned something, though. I've never heard that. I've always done by touch, and at the beginning, as it starts to get longer and ripen, if it doesn't have much, as in you can't feel as much seed or much meat to it, as I call it, it's not ready. And then if it has surpassed that and gotten skinny you're getting and shrunk down, you've let it go too far and you're not going to get anything out of it. It's just going to basically be the shell.
Right.
So you have to find that good middle where it's a little bit soft, but you can tell there's going to be a good crunch to it.
Right.
And snap.
And I will say, in preface, what you buy at the store is not always a good example of, oh, this looks like what it should in the store, therefore it's ready to go. No. That is not always true. A lot of store foods that you get, unless they are organic, are used with GMOs, so they will grow better.
Exponentially.
Yeah. And if you use GMOs, then that, could be a great teller. But if not, you have to gauge it a little bit more on expertise. You can Google it. Like I said, typically it's based on size, color, and some of them, like watermelon, you can tell by sound. If you hit it and it sounds hollow, then it's ready. At least that's what I've heard. And then some you can tell by the smell. I want to say if it's honeydew, if you hold it up and smell.
If it's got a really sweet smell to it.
I've never grown honeydew, but I know that a lot of people use that trick in the stores, like to see or look for the best one. They'll smell it. And so that applies to others, like peaches, I think it applies to. There are some other fruits like that. But yeah, so that's for harvesting. It's really easy to do. It really just depends on how you want to do it, what makes you most comfortable, and what's easiest. The next thing we're going to talk about is end of the season chores.
Oof.
Yes.
It's so sad.
The cleanup. So first of all, we're going to talk about composting. And this typically consists of leaves and pumpkins because what I'll do is, like, if I get a pumpkin for a jack-o'-lantern, my sister and I do those every year, afterwards we will put them in our garden. The one, I don't know, some people consider it a pro, some people consider it a con, it just depends on you, is that you, by composting your pumpkins, risk them growing where you've composted them. I don't necessarily mind, it just means that I get free pumpkins, so, that's cool.
Yeah.
Some people don't like it because they take up a lot of space, they're, depending on the kind you get, they can get kind of big and just in the way. But leaves, I don't know if this is common knowledge or not. What I've done is if I get like bulbs for wildflowers, what you can do is bury those bulbs and then put dirt over it, put a layer of leaves and then dirt over that to hold it down. It will not only insulate your seeds, bulbs, so that they stay alive during the winter. It will also keep in the moisture and provide nutrients to the bulbs so that when spring comes around and they're ready to sprout, they have a lot of food there. And Heather, what do you do for composting? How do you tear down your garden?
So I do like you do for the most part, because I do a fall display anymore. I just combine the Halloween and Thanksgiving season, or the fall, all of fall. I do a big pumpkin display and stuff like that, and a cute porch display. Once it's done, once I see they're kind of getting puny and kind of mushing down, I just toss them where I want them to grow. Is what I do. Excuse me, is what I do. And then if they haven't kind of rotted away, I will go out there and make it kind of something fun. My son and I do, and we just put our boots on and we smush it, so everything will get smashed and the seeds will do what they need to do, or they won't. I kind of leave it up to Mother Nature. Is how I do my pumpkins. Now, with the rest of my stuff, we have a really big tree in our backyard that is along the fence that I have my garden in. I just let the leaves fall down into it and just let it lay. I obviously, I'll take up my plants once they've, there's a time where the tomato plants will start to wither away, all my other plants will wither away. I will take some of those out, and then if I have tomatoes that have fallen off the vine or got rotten or I didn't get to them, I just leave them where they lay. So maybe they will reseed because they will have seeds in them. So maybe whatever happens. I'll let Mother Nature take its course.
Just do its thing.
Just let it do its thing, and then I try to clean up any sticks or whatever, because usually in the fall we get a lot of sticks that fall down, and so I just let the tree and Mother Nature do its thing. Maybe ruffle around some things, but through the winter and early spring until it hits 50-ish consistently, I just leave it be, leave the tires as is with the dirt and the leaves over there, so it could help nature and nature will help it.
Yeah, uh, depending on the plant, some of your plants will go to seed and
Mm-hmm.
some will not. I think it's mostly like onions and
Mm-hmm.
chives will go to seed and dill.
Mm-hmm.
Some like tomatoes, I don't know that they typically do. You kind of just let, as Heather said, the tomatoes lie
Yep.
and they'll decompose and the seeds may or may not germinate and then sprout a new plant.
Yeah.
So typically I don't actually take up a lot of my garden.
Mm-hmm.
I've left my blueberries in, just as they are for 4 years, which is required because they do take a couple of years to grow and then start producing.
Mm-hmm.
I did not take up my strawberries because I wanted to just let them kind of die and decompose on their own. I'm planning on taking them up anyways this
Mm-hmm.
spring. But there are ones like my marigolds. I left those
Yep.
in to go to seed. I've left my rosemary in just because it's hardy
Mm-hmm.
enough that it lasted all through the winter.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are others like my grape plant. I ended up not liking it, so I just tore it out. My tomato plants got torn up and things of the sort. So it kind of depends on the plants. Usually, the regular like tomatoes, green beans, cucumbers,
Mm-hmm.
zucchini, those are ones you'll probably want to pull up.
Mm-hmm.
But hardier plants, ones that may have like thicker stems and
Mm-hmm.
branches, like that blueberry or my rosemary, those will be fine throughout the winter. You can keep those and then they'll just grow when they're ready to grow in the
Mm-hmm.
spring.
Because those are perennials.
Right.
Now, to side note or preface, some herbs we have in our garden are perennial. So, like the rosemary should come back. If not, it comes to seed. I've always had good luck with seed, and parsley. I've always had good luck with it coming back. I'm pretty sure it is a perennial, but there are quite a few herbs that people don't realize that are perennial in the perennial variety. So they will come back every year if you treat them right and let them do their thing.
Right. And we're back. Sorry about that. So we just finished up talking about preparing your garden, things that will go to seed, things that will need pulled up, and things that you can just leave because it will need to grow for the next season. What we'll be talking about now is taking up structures. And Heather, will you tell us kind of what you do?
Well, my structures are pretty simple and easy. I leave up my little cattle pen trellis that I have for my green beans. It usually does pretty good. Now this year I'm gonna rework it because the neighborhood cats like to use it as a cat box. I'm gonna add a couple things to that, but mine kind of entails, leaving the tires as is, the dirt, and letting the leaves do the work. I do have a structure that is for my tomatoes. I leave that up because that is iron. But the thing I disassemble or take off is I also, the reason I have that up is to hold my tomato plants up, and I usually tie yarn or some kind of string or whatever to my tomato plants that will hold them up straight along the trellis or the structure here. I will snip that off every year at the end of the season to get that off and dismantle that way. But I don't have a lot of dismantling or taking up any structure for me. I don't have a lot to do.
The only thing that I do is, as I've mentioned, I have a cage around my blueberry plants. It's a very makeshift cage. It consists of, I think it's PCP pipe. Is that the right
PVC?
term? PVC. Sorry. I have those, and they're interconnected to basically just make like a rectangle, and then I take not necessarily chicken wire, but basically a netting that stops birds from flying in, and I drape it over, and then I use string to tie and secure it. And so basically I just untie those. I fold up the net to be used for next spring if it survives. Sometimes there will be tears, sometimes I will tear it.
Oops.
It's pretty easy to find, it's cheap to buy, so it's not too much of an issue. But yeah, then I take down that PVC pipe, I just dismantle it, and then I put all of the interconnecting parts into a box to make sure that they don't get lost randomly in my garage. And then I take all the longer sections and put them in a barrel where they just stay together, that I can easily grab them and reassemble it next spring.
Which is great.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me.
It's very helpful. Like I said, I've had a great turnout with my blueberry plants, and birds and other critters cannot get at them, which is great. Other than that, I don't have many structures that I need to tear down either. I don't have any other cages for my plants. I kind of just let them be. The only other thing that I do is tearing up the plants, and then occasionally I have stones around my garden, and occasionally throughout the summer, dirt gets under there or rain just shifts it and they'll tip. So I don't necessarily tear up a structure more than I realign those and adjust them to make sure it looks nice year round.
Mm-hmm.
Some gardens, and this will be part of the research that you'll find depending on the garden you have, like if you use a tote garden where you just get a big plastic tote, you put holes in it, or however you decide to do it, those will need to be taken down and stored differently than it will like a permanent box garden that I have, or as Miss Heather said, the tires that she has for her gardens. So the tearing up part of your gardening experience just depends on what you decide to do. If you do a free range garden, there is very little to no tearing up of structures unless you do. I know some farmers will get like spikes and they'll use the chicken wire or something like that to have their beans climb on. You may have to take that down.
Yep.
Like I said, it just totally depends on the type of garden you decide to do. And Miss Heather, are there any like specific gardens or specific structures that would need taken up in other gardens that I'm missing that you can think of?
A lot of people around here have tomatoes. They do tomato cages.
Right.
Those will be needing taken up. I have what my husband was taught to make was chicken wire cages. He just bent it to make a round to fit over the starters or the young tomato plants so nothing could get to them, namely birds or other little critters. I have to take those up about mid-season, or if they start growing out of that structure, I will take them up. My husband has a rope that has little hooks or something on there. Somehow he attaches them, and they are on a string of rope that get put up about mid-season for us. That's the most structural things I really do. Other than the snipping of the yarn or the string I have for the tomatoes. Tomato cages are really, you can get them every year, but I know a lot of people like to use and reuse because they can get kind of pricey, depending on what you get, and the more colorful, the more price you're going to pay. That's what I've learned. So that's a lot of the bigger structure breakdown that I know of.
Right. And other than taking up structures, the last thing that I would like to discuss is pre-planting. As I mentioned earlier, I have wildflower bulbs, which, as I said, I buried, put my leaves to compost over them, and then buried those in dirt. I personally don't know of any other plants that come in the form of a bulb that you can pre-plant. Maybe onions?
Onions can, if you're talking about in the fall time when everything starts to die down, you can do, the bulb plants, and some do really well wintering over trees. The biggest thing a lot of people do is plant trees in the fall.
Okay. I did not know that.
Spring and fall.
But yeah, that's just one thing that you can do if you are looking into flower gardens. Bulbs are typically for those. But as Miss Heather said, there are some exceptions. And if you want to grow trees, just any tree you can. One tree that you could grow is an apple tree. They do take a while. I want to say 3 years to grow.
3 to 4, something like that.
Yeah, 3 to 4 to grow, and then possibly 4 to 5 to start producing fruit. So that's something that if you are staying, at your current residence for a long time and you plan to really make it a home, that is something you could do. I had a apple tree in Minnesota, and my grandma had several in her backyard, and my sister and I would go out. We would pick up those apples, sometimes accidentally run over them with the lawnmower. But yeah, we would use them in applesauce, occasionally apple pies if we got it from the right tree. Our one in Minnesota, we just went out and picked them off the ground, washed them off, cut off any bad spots, and then ate it as a snack. The one tree didn't produce enough to, make that apple pie or anything like that. So my mom just said, if you're hungry and you want a snack, go eat the apples. They're healthy. That was her solution, and it was good. So that's something you could look into. I know Miss Rachel Hill, as many of you know her, her family grows a couple of apple trees, and I'd like to say that they grow a different kind of tree, but I'm not sure what kind it is. I'll have to get back to you for that. But yeah, that is all we have today. As Miss Heather said, I am so sorry. We are hoping to have special guests these next 2 weeks. They are two professors of mine. One specializes in plant cell biology and botany, and then the other teaches zoology and animal biology, which is animal biology, but he has a lot of experience in landscape. So next week we will be talking with him about that. And by next week, I mean 2 weeks from when you see, or a week from when you see this video. Sorry. But yeah, so that will be what we plan for that. And then my other professor, we will either have her talk about seed germination. It will be a science video, very nerdy. Yes. We will ask her to make it a lesson for the general public because I know biology is not everyone's forte or interest.
It is complicated at times.
A little bit. But yeah, I thought that would be really fun for some of you guys out there to just like have a little fun biology lesson and get things from a very scientific point of view versus the casual, like general information that we know from experience. So without further ado, we will see you guys next week.
Bye, guys.